Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 15th of November 2023. Just before we go to the map, let's look at a members poll I have just presented. Now, there's only 3 answers because it's literally gone up like 5 minutes ago. This is a poll out on YouTube for members of the channel. Thank you very much for being members. It's a completely arbitrary poll. Just to get thought processes of people answering it and understand what they think is important. There are only 5 options I can possibly put here, so unfortunately I can't give some of the options I would have liked to have given, such as GLSDB, so on and so forth. But I said this is a random arbitrary members poll. If you had to choose one of these to get to Ukraine in the next week, what would it be? So option 1, 2 Gripen fighters. Option 2, 1 million artillery rounds and 500,000 mortar bombs. Option 3, 40 Abrams tanks. Option 4, 120 CV-90 or similar infantry fighting vehicles. And option number 5, 200 Taurus missiles. So, I don't know, tell me what you think there. Right, we'll go to the map now. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, please pause the video and check out the key on the video now. Let's go to the northeast sector, or the axis really, from Kupiansk down to Svratovo to Crimea. Someone's asking whether the Russian Volunteer Corps are still active. I reported last week that they had shot a vehicle up somewhere in, I think, Belgorod or Bryansk, I'm not 100% sure, but certainly somewhere along the northern border, and they took out some FSB officers in doing so, but not as active as they were some time back, that's for sure. Anyway, Kupiansk to Svratovo to Crimea, it is active along here. Lots of talk about the Russians, putting pressure on, particularly up in this northern area near Kupiansk. Andrew Perpetua in his live stream last night said that essentially they are pressuring. The Russians are inching forward, and what happens is they take a bunch of land, the Ukrainians fight back and take some of that land back, but the net result is the Russians are pushing forward little by little, maybe like 100 meters a day, but over time that all adds up. And so this is just this incremental creep forward. He also said it's not too much of a problem for the Ukrainians here, as long as they, and I guess I can draw that myself, as long as the Russians don't get past this river here that comes down. You can see it just coming across there. Now, as long as they can keep the Russians behind that defensive line, they're broadly happy enough. And they are not there yet. It is quite advantageous for the Ukrainians around here, particularly this side of the Oskil River. As it comes down towards Kupiansk, you can see that actually there's quite high ground here. If we sort of look over towards the Russian positions over there, as they are slowly inching their way southwards, that's going from left to right on the screen here, this is higher ground. Although it doesn't look so incredible here on the way it manifests, it renders in Google Earth. You can accentuate that in other versions of this program, but you can still see that actually they have a really good line of sight all along this area from the top of the hills to the west of the Oskil River. And that gives the Ukrainians a real advantage. It's perfect, as he says, for parking tanks here, especially main battle tanks, modern main battle tanks like the Abrams and the Challenger. The Challenger has really good, because it's got a rifled barrel. It's the only one really now that has that, of the main modern battle tanks, and that's going to be replacing the Challenger 3 turret. But anyway, the Challenger 2 has a rifle bore barrel, and that will allow good accuracy over long distance with Squashhead Hesh munitions that would be good for firing those distances. And they can elevate, or they can the angle of the barrels can go slightly down, rather than the Soviet tanks that can't really do that. So they can drive up here, drive to the edge, and they can depress their turret slightly downwards so they can fire off into the distance and then reverse fairly quickly, because they're good at reversing compared to some of the T family tanks, and get back here into safe land. Now, whether they are doing that, I don't know, but the idea is that this offers really good sight over that whole area, really good ATGM territory as well, anti-tank guided missiles. So the Ukrainians, although the Russians are gaining around here, the Ukrainians are happy enough, I guess, with their positioning, given that they have the advantageous territory there, particularly along this part of the Oskil River, looking all the way over there. I mean, if you think, well, let's have a look at the distances you can get there. So that is 8.5 kilometers to kind of where the Russians are, I guess. Any closer than that, and they really are coming into, ATGM and tank range. So that would, and you can think about snipers as well up there. So this whole area then is quite flat along here. Let's see if there's any advantage for the Ukrainians this side. Well, actually, it does go uphill. So the Russians might have the advantage. It seems to go uphill coming, or it comes downhill as they come south and onto this river part here. So around Pischani. So anyway, the Russians might convey some kind of advantage from that direction. I don't know. We'll see. So let's now come back out. We'll see what the height difference is. So whenever I move the cursor on the screen, remember the height on the bottom right hand gives you the elevation. So that's 158 meters coming down there or thereabouts. Then comes down to the river, 100 meters there, and then starts going up again to about the same height. So this and this is about the same height, comes down to that river, and that's the river that they don't want the Russians to get beyond. Anyway, the Ukrainians are keeping them at bay to some degree, but it is a slow creep forward there. And of course, the Russians are happy with slow creeps forward. They can expend a lot of troops and still gain that territory and call it something of a success. The Ukrainians are managing to trick the Russians to quite a large degree up and down the front line, and that is a challenge for them. In fact, the Kyiv Independent here, quoting the ISW, says Russian forces are likely attempting to regain the initiative in Ukraine through multiple simultaneous offensives. Several Ukrainian officials have underscored the complexity of the frontline situation, affirming the Ukrainian forces maintain control of the battle space. The Institute for the Study of War cited Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny, who emphasized the heightened intensity in the Avdiivka, Kupiansk and Mariinka directions during a conversation with the US Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff Charles Brown. That is interesting that the three places mentioned are Kupiansk, where we've just been, Avdiivka, which is very tough for the Ukrainians at the moment, and Mariinka, where there has been a lot of activity. I haven't really reported on it in any granular detail. There's been no exchange of territory there, but there have been reports of it being really heavy fighting there at the moment, not mentioning Bakhmut, where the initiative seems to have switched back to being one of Russian initiative there. The ISW itself mentions, I'm not going to go through much more, just to say that they're likely trying to regain theatre level initiative in Ukraine, the Russians, but on the other hand, Andrei Yermak from the president's office has said that the Ukrainian forces have gained a foothold in the east at Kherson, on the east bank of the Kherson, the Dnieper River in Kherson. So success with the Ukrainians there, possibly under the cosh a little bit elsewhere. Right, let's come now down to Bakhmut. There's all the usual stuff happening in Serebyansky Forest, so on and so forth. Oh, indeed, actually, no, I'm going to show you some geolocated footage first. So the ISW says geolocated footage published the 13th and 14th indicates that the Russian forces have advanced southwest of Pershio-Travnevi. So it's going back to where I was. Sorry, this is Pershio-Travnevi. So potentially some increase in territory here, but it's likely not to signify anything on top of what we already have here, because the ISW is often kind of behind in terms of, well, not necessarily behind, but they seem to talk about gains in terms of like a week-long time period, whereas we deal on a day-to-day basis. So we're like, right, the mapping is already here. ISW says, and there are gains, and those gains appear to be behind where we have the mapping, and that's because they're taking a longer view of that, I think, really. Or they're just wrong. So the claims here are that the Russians are in that position. So what is claimed, I'm not showing you the footage, but repelling an enemy infantry attack southwest of the village of Pershio-Travnevi. So This is a repelled attack. What happens to them? Do they control that? Or if they're repelled here, I would say that this indicates that Andrew Perpetua is probably correct, which is the Russian defensive lines are further to the north. They're sending out attacks. They're getting repelled, which means they'll probably retreat back to somewhere behind there. This would indicate that the area being discussed here would be grey zone and not fully under control of the Russians, as is indicated by Syriac maps here with the red line. Anyway, there you go, little confirmation of at least some move forward there for the Russians, even if they don't robustly control that area. Right, we're now going to look at Bakhmut, and again we have some gains for the Russians, and again it's around the Bakivka reservoir area. Now, I don't think these are particular gains over the last 24 hours necessarily. This is just Andrew Perpetua bringing his lines more in line with what Syriac maps had. They were quick to change that. Andrew Perpetua a bit more conservative, waiting for that evidence to come out and then changing. And the same, it seems. Oh, actually, no, the odd situation here. So there are Ukrainian gains here, as according to Deep State map. My guess might be, though, that is a rejig. Just they had the Russians coming further forward and then maybe more evidence to come out. Turns out they're not back there. Or the Ukrainians have counterattacked around here. Andrew Perpetua again was saying that the Ukrainians would not want to lose this area here, but it wouldn't want the Russians to push them back beyond the road. I mean, the road has no strategic value as far as a ground line of communication into Bakhmut. The Ukrainians aren't obviously bothered about that. They don't control Bakhmut. But just from a defensive point of view, it starts getting, being a case of being pushed back before. I mean, they're already about where they were at the beginning of the counteroffensive, give or take here. As you can see, we have high ground in certain areas around here. He was saying that, where was it? Was it around Bakivka? Give me 2 ticks. That was it. It was looking into. So if I come out of here, just to give you an understanding of where I am, there are some advantageous positions for the Ukrainians looking into and down and into Bakhmut here. There is this dirt track here, which is like a car track, and I think there's a mountain bike track somewhere else around here. And this is where they don't want to be pushed back further than, because this is advantageous in terms of being like perfect sniper terrain. And in fact, this has been used. There's video evidence to suggest that the Ukrainians do sit up here along the brow of this hill, right along this tree line, and there have been photos of Ukrainians with sniper kit here with this in the background. So this is somewhere where they like to sit, and they, as you can see, they have just this view over Bakhmut, and they can take pot shots at the Russians on the edge of Bakhmut, and indeed going even further. So this is really useful terrain for the Ukrainians to keep hold of. We'll see how far from the brow of that hill into. Yeah, so that's a kilometer. Now, if you're thinking that maybe you've got a super duper sniper rifle, then you can be shooting quite far into Bakhmut, and indeed, you might get a really heavy big caliber rifle, and you can do some serious damage going quite far into Bakhmut there. So that is a useful position. They don't want to lose it, but the Russians are moving on that position with every passing day, moving closer to that, so that you might start seeing the Ukrainians, rather than do this operational withdrawal that we've seen, put up more of a fight there. Okay, down to the south of Bakhmut, we have Klishchivka. No different change to the map there. What Andrew Perpetua again said in his live stream, sorry to refer to him so much, but he's such a good quality source. They apparently around here that they aren't really making the gains, the Russians, as in past the railway line. Although it must be said, if we look at some of the sources, let's go to the Bakhmut sources, and here we have actually, so that's what we're just talking about. Global War Monitor talking about Bakivka Reservoir, the Russians making some gains there. But this is what I wanted to show. So this is Andriivka, the repelling a Russian assault to the northeast of the village of Andriivka. But actually, this is being geolocated by War Archive to the other side of the railway line by the looks of it. So I was just about to say that actually the Russians are being held back behind a railway line, but potentially there is Russian presence, at least attacks, going to the west of the railway line, north of Andriivka. They say northeast of Andriivka, but you can see here we've got those three ponds and Russian geolocated troops to the west of there. So that is a worry. If the Russians are in this area and making attacks, it doesn't mean they control that area, but it probably means that the Ukrainians don't have robust control over the train line, the railway line going north around and curling around Klishchivka there. That was, by the way, just to let you know, the claim about that was repelling the Russian assault to the northeast of the village of Andriivka, and that's in 93rd Mechanized Brigade there. And then this is coming from the Institute for the Study of War, who say about Bakhmut, additional geolocated footage published on the 14th shows that Russian forces have advanced westward along a tree line west of Orikovo-Vasilivka. So we're just about to go back north of Bakhmut again with this geolocation. So this is Ukrainian 52nd Brigade shelling a Russian position and suggesting that this Russian position, at least according to the ISW, indicates that they have moved forward. So again, as I say, north, and that would indeed indicate a move forward. Now, again, we talk about whether they control that. If it's a position, you think they might be there in the trench lines, but if they're then getting shelled, how much do they control that? Does that support the mapping there in that this is grey zone? Or does it show that the Russians have advanced? And you could interpret that as being either, in what is being said here. So a small Russian advance is being claimed here. So the Russians are pushing all around Bakhmut, it seems, trying to regain the initiative there for sure. What the ISW says a bit further on is that Ukrainian General Staff stated that Ukrainian forces continued assault actions in the Bakhmut direction on November the 14th. And that General Syrsky has noted that Ukrainian defense of the Bakhmut area is hindering Russian offensive capabilities. Why I've highlighted that is because of the language used there. So the Ukrainians are now hindering Russian offensive capabilities. That is to admit that the Russians are on the offense here, that there has been a shift in momentum, and up and down this front line, the Ukrainians are being pushed. Now, the other thing to say about Klishchivka that Andrew Perpetua mentioned in talking about a source that contacted him from Klishchivka area, it wasn't so much that the source was too worried about the Russian attacks, but they are acting rather like they were in the previous Bakhmut iteration of this sector, when the Wagnerites were doing penal unit, Storm Z unit meat waves. There appear to be some meat waves happening again. The Russians are losing huge numbers of people doing the same thing. He said that there's a rotation of a unit around here, and the new unit came in because the previous unit had been so degraded, and the new Russian unit came in and didn't do anything different, just did exactly what the last unit did, and just wave after wave of attack that gets repelled. And there's quite a lot of footage now coming out from both Bakhmut and Avdiivka, just an awful lot of footage of Russians getting tonked left, right, and centre, and lots of equipment being destroyed. But they must be thinking that's worth it, because they'll creep forward, and take the territory eventually, but at just huge costs. The people that Perpetua was talking about here was saying that they're more worried about the winter, having a second winter, having survived the first winter, being volunteers from the second day of the war. These guys are like, there were, so many people have lost limbs or got pneumonia or whatever. It's the cold and the wet and never getting a chance to dry yourself and warm yourself. That's what seeps away at your morale, seeps away at your kind of mental energy, and also physically harms you. People lose limbs and fingers, and body is harmed by the cold as much as it is by the effects of the war. And that is something that they're not looking forward to. They're saying, I don't know if we can survive another winter. Not worried about the Russian attacks, worried about the onslaught of the climate. Right. Okay, going now to Avdiivka, where the ISW says geolocated footage posted on the 14th shows that Russian forces have made marginal advances in the Avdiivka industrial zone near Yazyanudvata Lane, about 1 kilometre southeast of Avdiivka. This is a slightly worrying situation that I've reported on before. You've got the area north of Spartak, where the Russians have been attacking towards Tsarska Ochota, which is a restaurant here, and then potentially pushed back to the road. But further along the road, we have this industrial zone that the Ukrainians have been pushed back in, and this is, Andrew Perpetua says, this is a grey zone, although Surrey Maps has that under control of the Russians. For Andrew Perpetua, that's a grey zone, but there are lost tanks there. I mean, they have got tanks into here. There's imagery of tanks that have been taken out there, but they are utilizing mechanized equipment in that area, and that is a bit of a challenge. That's a worry for the Ukrainians. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces continue to improve their tactical positions on the eastern outskirts of Stepova. That's north of Avdiivka, as we'll go to in a second. And a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces use Wagner tactics in assaults on eastern Stepova and conducted small group assaults against fortified Ukrainian positions, suggesting that Russian forces conducted infantry-led frontal assaults without armoured vehicle support. Again, goes to what we've seen in Bakhmut, perhaps, and talks to the idea that they have either expended all of their mechanised equipment, or they've expended so much that they thought, we are going to change tactics slightly. The adaptation isn't exactly world-changing. Instead of using up vehicles, we're going to use up human beings. But this is activity on the eastern edge of Stepova, where we've seen the Russians be repelled from there with a Bradley raking fire up and down here, and FPV drones hitting basements in the area. Basements aren't particularly big. They're not going to give you too much protection. They're usually one room, and if an FPV drone can get down into that, then you don't actually have as much safety as you might like. Surat Maps shows, although there's no tweet about it, just shows a little bit of Russian movement, literally just this triangle there along that railway line north of Stepova. And then, we'll look at a couple of other sources here. Tatarugami says the BBC published an article in Russian, so there's a BBC Russia, titled "Does it make sense for Ukraine to fight for Avdiivka?" In this article, several experts argue that Avdiivka lacks military significance. I disagree with this assessment and find it misleading. I actually disagree with that. You've heard me say before that I think Avdiivka has a lot more strategic value than Bakhmut, for example. While I agree, says Tatarugami, that the assault on Avdiivka likely has political reasons, as I discussed on the day the assault started, focusing solely on the political aspects is not only inaccurate but also dangerous. The article states, quote, "Most experts agree that it is exclusively political, not military significance for the Kremlin." I strongly disagree with it. Avdiivka has played a key military role in Donetsk since 2014. He goes on to say, on this map, I've marked potential routes and opportunities that could arise for Russian forces in the event of Avdiivka falling. While it's not an exact representation, it provides a general idea of the range of opportunities that may open up for the Russian forces to advance. Avdiivka plays a key role in both defensive and offensive operations. It denies Russian forces operational space and protects the flanks of logistical hubs. While it's accurate that Avdiivka may not be used as a foothold to assault Donetsk in the near future, if an opportunity arises, Avdiivka will play a key role in successfully entering Donetsk. This essentially revisits the 2014 scenario with the potential for different outcomes. I agree with the analysis in this article, emphasizing that Ukraine doesn't need a second Bakhmut, especially in its late stage. Holding territory for political rather than operational necessity when encirclement becomes imminent can lead to avoidable losses. Avdiivka's military significance should not not be dismissed, since it serves as a barrier preventing Russian forces from entering the operational space towards Pokrovsk, Kurakova, and Konstantinivka, crucial nodes in Donetsk Oblast. The Russians underestimated Ukrainian forces in this attack, necessitating resource diversion from elsewhere for limited advances. Although immediate exploitation is doubtful, they can continue to expand by reallocating forces from other areas replaced by newly formed units. And to go back to what I've said before, I mean, this is so close to Donetsk city that it allows the Ukrainians to hit Donetsk city with just conventional artillery with more ease. Certainly before it was so encircled. So previously, really, if you look at the purple line, that's really where it would have been before the Russians had, greater and greater success north and south of Avdiivka. So it does have a strategic value in how it can affect, life in Donetsk. And also, if you are Russians and you need to get, attacked to the further to the west, then you absolutely need to take Avdiivka out. It's a thorn in the side of this kind of Donetsk front, and the Ukrainians are very well dug in and defending there. But the problem is you can be super well defended on this eastern and southeastern front, but if you're completely operationally encircled, then that kind of renders any advantage you have moot there. So it's all about here, this whole area, particularly I'd say more this northern Krasnohorivka area is more important than the southern one. And you might see the Ukrainians eventually operationally withdraw to build a solid defensive line between the neck of this present cauldron. But I don't know. We'll see how that calculus evolves. And then finally here we have a geolocation. I think, is this the one from ISW? Geolocated footage says that Russian forces made a marginal advance, and that's what this footage is. So this is the BUAR and RUB pack of the 110th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainians destroying a Russian tank, and that again talks to the idea of there being a tank in that industrial zone to the southeast. And here you go. So that has been taken out. You can see that's further forward from even Syriac defensive lines. So they are evidently trying to move forward into this grey zone. I think this whole area is probably safely a grey zone. That is a worrying geolocation for the Ukrainians, that's for sure, even though that's probably signifies a repelled attack and that the Russians aren't there and they have been pushed back from there. They have been attacking to that point. So it is, as I say, a worry for the Ukrainians. Right, let's move on from Avdiivka now and move further to the south, knowing that Mariinka, there's a lot of heavy fighting around there. It's one of the three places pointed out by the Ukrainians as being a lot of heavy fighting, but nothing too much to say about it. We are going to go to the Velika Novosilka area, where it's claimed that poor weather conditions will continue to complicate ground operations until the soil solidifies, and Russians have claimed that fighting in the area has become positional as a result of that weather. So that is in this area there, Staromyrske, Uruzhainy, and then we're going to come on to Robotyne further to the west, where there's a little bit here. This is referring to the Institute for the Study of War, saying geolocated footage published on the 14th shows that Ukrainian forces have advanced northwest of Verbove. To remind you where Verbove is, that's this area here, this town. The Ukrainians have been having some success north of there. Well, this is a lot of Russian artillery and AGS shelling on Ukrainian positions. So let's look where the Ukrainians are. And the same reasoning will apply here. Does this mean that Ukrainians have robust control over this, or is this advance? So this could just be Ukrainians advancing into the grey zone. I think that would certainly suggest that Syriac maps is wrong here. If the Ukrainians are here, then the Russian defensive lines won't be there. So if anything, this supports Andrew Perpetua's mapping in this particular area. So we have Ukrainians in that location. We have them in this location too. slightly further back, which is what you would sort of expect. Oops. And then finally, third location here, which indicates that the Ukrainians are there. So, yeah, very close to the Surrey map line. So I'd suggest that if they're getting hammered there, it's probably not robust control. It probably is a grey zone, and Andrew Perpetua's mapping is probably correct in that area. But it does show, as far as the ISW are probably concerned, that would show an advance there, moving through and into towards the Russian defensive lines and pushing them back. Anyway, that is the Robotinet area as far as my sources are concerned there. The ISW just says one Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces activated near Piatikatki and captured several unspecified positions, while another mill blogger claimed that the sector of front near Piatikatki and Zherebianki is stable with periodic shelling. So one saying the Russians are making advances, and another saying it's completely stable and it's just positional fighting. So take your pick there. Potential Russian gains around there, but probably not. I mean, it hasn't really moved for a long time in that area. And then we're going to finally come on to the Krinky area particularly, but Kherson in general, the Dnipro River. The ISW states of this area, geolocated footage published on the 13th shows that Ukrainian forces advance in Krinky and about 3.6 kilometers north of the East E58 highway. Okay, so what do my sources say about here? Speaker of Southern Defense Forces Natalia Humenyuk has called for information silence. The armed forces of Ukraine in the Kherson direction are asking for information silence so that then they can report on great successes, she reports. Now, I don't know that they are making the gains they were maybe a few days ago. It seems to have slowed down, but then is that down to operational security? I don't know. They are making some fairly big announcements to Ukrainians. So Andrei Yermak, as I've said before, has announced that against all odds, Ukraine's armed forces or defense forces have gained a foothold on the left bank of the Dnipro. He said at an address to the Hudson Institute think tank, step by step, they are demilitarizing Crimea. We have covered 70% of the distance and our counteroffensive is developing. So they're still quite bullish, at least officially, about how they are doing in what they think is a counteroffensive that is still going. The Kyiv Independent reports that Ukrainians step up efforts to cross the Dnipro, tie up Russian forces in Kherson Oblast. Ukrainian forces, they report, have reportedly stepped up their attacks on Russian positions to try and secure a beachhead and bring heavy armor into the fight. They aren't quite there yet, but assaults on the eastern bank could mean Ukraine is getting closer to opening a new front in the south. Ukraine has been conducting raids into Russian-occupied territory on the eastern bank since February. Over the last few days, Russian military bloggers have claimed that Ukrainian troops began bringing heavy equipment across the river for the first time. One blogger said that the Ukrainians are advancing south of the village of Krinky, located some 35 kilometers from the city of Kherson. However, Ukrainian Special Forces soldier in the area who goes by the name of Skiff dismissed these reports. His real name is hidden for security reasons. Quote, it's not yet true about heavy equipment, but it's true that there are more personnel here. So there might be the odd piece of equipment. We have seen some brought across. But I don't know that it's there in any meaningful numbers. The situation changes very quickly, he says. It's very difficult out there. Krinky is not under our full control, but we're trying to move forward. There's lots of talk in here. It's a fairly decent article, has quite a bit of information. Crossing by boat is the only option since the Antonovsky Bridge linking Kherson to the other bank was destroyed in November 2022, and Ukrainian forces don't have enough boats to launch a massive landing, Skiff said. Quote, if we manage to make a bridge with normal logistics, we won't need boats, but we need a lot of them right now. A breakthrough or the threat of one in Kherson Oblast could even force Russia to draw reserves from the occupied part of Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Arguably, that has already happened. Some reporting that has happened. Bolster Ukraine's morale and help units fighting on the southern front by creating a diversion as the southern counteroffensive stalls. Quote, in the future, deeper and more powerful raids are possible in coordination with troops on the southern front deep into the territory of Zaporizhzhia, says a Ukrainian by the name of Zgurets. A bridgehead would put Russian logistics at greater risk in the area, potentially complicating reinforcement from Crimea in the southern front. But the terrain is dodgy. Assaults over the water are notoriously complex, especially given the marshy terrain surrounding the eastern bank of the river. Quote, Ukraine lacks strength for this, and it is a very risky situation. So gaining a foothold on the other side of the river requires a sufficient number of forces and engineering equipment, in particular pontoons, and Ukraine hasn't deployed these so far. Troops can't bring in much needed armoured vehicles on their small rafts, which is why bringing heavy equipment across the river is a game changer in the area. Ukrainian assault troops mostly consist of marine units, infantry equipped with small arms, crossing the river on rigid inflatables. They're covered by artillery from the west bank of the river, but it's not enough to keep a secure position for long unless Ukraine manages to send more armoured vehicles in reinforcement. Naval mines litter the bank, which makes it as tricky as the mine-strewn fields of Zaporizhia Oblast. And finally, compared to the Battle of Bakhmut or Avdiivka, Russian forces are not taking the initiative to attack, but are staying on the defensive here. So I think that's an interesting difference. Skiff said that the swampy terrain makes trenches impossible. It doesn't make Russian forces any easier to break either. So the idea that actually right next to the river, trenches are very difficult, particularly in this delta area, and so they're not coming across the same kind of defensive fortifications that they are in Zaporizhia, but they probably will, because as soon as you get past that, the land gets a lot drier, and there are various trenches around. Even if you can't see full-on big yellow lines here, they have been digging extensively behind the river area over the course of the war, or since they've occupied this territory. But yeah, so Krinky, Kozachi Lahiri, Podstepny, Pischenivka and Poima still, in focus here. Wargonzo, the Russian source, says in his early update that Ukrainian forces are trying to expand their presence near Pischenivka and Poima, based on his assessment, unsuccessfully. Additionally, Russians haven't been able to clear the Ukrainian bridgehead near Krinky. The Ukrainian infantry says no reports unit inside Krinky is coming under Russian artillery or mortar fire. Location confirms they have slightly advanced west towards Kozachi Lahiri, and this is to suggest that the Ukrainians are possibly controlling a little bit more as they are moving westwards towards Kozachi Lahiri down there. But essentially not too much change. And here, this is according to the ISW? But anyway, this source saying that Russian 810th Marines adjusting shelling on the Ukrainians in Krinky. I don't think this does show any advance. This is pretty much where we knew they were anyway. It just kind of confirms the advances that had already been made. So not too much else to report around here. It seems to be ongoing activity in all of these places, and we'll, I guess, wait for a few days to see if the Ukrainians continue to make gains or whether the Russians have brought in enough reserves to try and stem the flow of Ukrainians across the river and halt their momentum there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Slightly longer one today because there was quite a lot of analysis to go through, but hopefully it gives you a greater contextual understanding of what's going on in these different areas of the front line. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.